Well, not so good, actually. In some cases, it's very good at curing things. Most chronic illnesses, it's got no idea what to do about, precisely because it ignores the mind-body unity and the stress-disease connection. And people come to us for symptom relief. Okay, we give them an anti-inflammatory or a painkiller or whatever we give, but we don't deal with the stresses in that person's lives that created the symptom in the first place.
Have you ever recommended to your patients to get hypnosis of any kind to deal with their subconscious?
The answer is yes. What I have done is I invite people to explore these issues that I've been talking about. Now I explore the emotional issues in their life, to look at their stresses and to learn ways of coping differently. And that may include hypnotherapy, that may include emotional freedom technique, that may include EMDR, that may include somatic experiencing, that may include counseling, just anything that individual needs or could use to get in touch with themselves and to get past sort of the defenses of the programmed mind. So hypnotherapy would be very helpful there. No, it's not. Hypnotherapy, you may have more experiences than I do. I don't find any modality works for everybody.
Right.
And so there has to be a range of possible
options
for people to consider.
There were many studies that you cited, for example, of people that get cancer. You had talked about being repressed and not able to say no to people, and a lot of anger that wasn't able to be communicated.
Yeah.
The other thing that you said was that it's not that the emotions cause the disease, but when they're not expressed, the body is therefore more vulnerable to.
There was a study 2 years ago, 4 years ago when a story came, several years after my book was published. It was the study was presented at the Heart and Stroke Foundation's International Congress on Women's Health. The study followed 1,700 women in Massachusetts, I think, for a 10-year period. Over a 10-year period, those women who were unhappily married and didn't express their emotions were 4 times as likely to die as those women who were also unhappily married and did express their emotions. So the issue wasn't whether you had the negative emotions, the so-called negative emotions. The issue was whether you expressed them or not.
That's really profound. Really profound.
No, that, of course, totally goes along with what I would have predicted from the information I present in the book. And it just joins the long list of research materials that have been published in bona fide mainstream journals, which are completely ignored by the medical profession. I don't mean every individual practitioner. I mean institutionally.
Can you explain psychoneuroimmunology to people? Because this is something you went back to many times in the book to make clear. It's apparently a new science, but what is it?
Well, it's simply, as the name implies, psycho, referring to the psyche, the emotional apparatus in the brain and our emotional life, and nervous system, immune system. So the psychoneuroimmunology studies the interconnections, in fact, the unity of our emotional centers with the immune system and the nervous system and the hormonal apparatus, which is to say, you can't separate these. In fact, they're one system, and to think about the nervous system as separate from emotions is scientifically completely erroneous. And it's useful to study them separately for learning purposes, but to imagine that in real life they function in isolation from the other, which is the basic assumption in medical practice, is completely unfounded. And psychoneuroimmunology is simply the science that studies the interconnectedness and unity of all these so-called separate systems.
Don't you think that it's going to be quite a challenge for the average trained medical doctor to open up to this realm of emotionality and the influence that emotions have on the body and the body has on emotions, simply because it's not part of the training, it's not part of the consciousness of becoming a doctor and being a doctor?
Well, it's even worse than that. I mean, that's true. And so, and physicians who are trained, physicians are very conservative people. I mean, what I mean by that is they want to conserve what they know, and they're afraid of what they don't know. And at least forms of knowledge that they're not familiar with simply are foreign to them. And they're not trained in some basic issues. They're not trained in normal human brain development. They're not trained in normal human psychology. They're not trained in the importance of attachments. They're not trained in family systems theory. They're not trained in psychoimmunology. I mean, there's a whole set of things that medical training completely excludes for the most part. But that's only a part of it. The other part of it is that the research naturally is driven by the people with the money, and the people with the money are the pharmaceutical companies. Now, if somebody has multiple sclerosis, there's a lot of money to be made to come up with a new drug that will control the symptoms a little bit better. There's no money to be made in helping people dealing with their stresses. So what kind of articles will appear in the research literature? Who will fund these articles? Who will fund the actual research? Naturally, only those that are based on a very narrowly biological view and which promise some profit.
That's why the whole realm of peer review is questionable, because you have the people that are controlling the
peer
thinking.
Review means that everybody drinks each other's bathwater.
Yeah.
And better than not being peer reviewed.
Right.
But it's a very narrow field. It's extremely narrow, number one. But furthermore, it's a broader issue than that, because we live in a society that separates mind from the body, that separates people from their environment. I mean, if we took our connection with our environment seriously for a minute, we couldn't be doing what we're doing with our economy and with our resources and with our lives. We couldn't be. But of course, this is what society is based on. And if we actually understood that people are shaped by their environment, then how could we possibly permit to happen to children what's happening to children? The separation from the adults, the stresses, the anxieties, the poverty, the environmental degradation, any number of things.
Including cell phone use, which drives me crazy watching it. Just unbelievable cell phone use.
All those things, okay? Now, in other words, we live in a society that itself is based on a very narrow-dimensional, one-dimensional view of human beings. And the medical profession, like all professions, is conditioned by the expectations and the ideological foundations of that society. So for doctors to break with that model would be, in every sense of the word, revolutionary. Because if doctors really understood what illness is about, they'd have to challenge the social system. Because it's clear that, for example, socioeconomic factors and the stresses that they place on parents are the major drivers of illness in childhood. They even shape the brain. Now, if we took that seriously, we couldn't, as physicians, ignore what's happening in society on a political economic level. So in other words, to ask physicians to understand all this stuff is to really to challenge them, to challenge the society that makes them very privileged members. So it's a complex problem.
Don't you also think if they really were in possession of the mind-body connection, they would never, ever dare tell a patient how long they have to live? They would never do it. Well,
look, I have a friend of mine who was 4 years ago. She's 47 now. And 10 years ago, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, which means that the tumor was already in her bones by the time she was diagnosed. She was given 1 year to live. That was 10 years ago. She's alive and doing well. Now, what she did do is she received the medical treatment gratefully, as well she should have, but she also looked at her life, and she realized her life had been a lie, that she'd been sexually abused as a child, but she never confronted her family. She never confronted her husband about his addiction, so in other words, she said she didn't say no to anything. She didn't express herself, and she began to express herself and to be authentically herself, and that's why she's still alive.
That's remarkable.
But famous examples, Stephen Hawking, the physicist, who wrote The Brief History of Time, and he was diagnosed with ALS, I think 56, 57 years ago now. He was given 1 year to live. That was 56 years ago. So clearly that narrowly biological view, which makes us predict things. Unfortunately, our predictions are often right, but they're only right because we don't know what else to do with people. What if all cancer patients were taught to actually start looking at their lives as honestly and as creatively, or what you say, as authentically as my friend Shannon did?